For the first 5 years that I was making music, I hardly made any progress. Finishing a song or coming up with a new idea felt more like luck than like I actually knew what I was doing. And I now realize that my approach was wrong. From the moment I fixed it, everything changed. My music got better, I was finishing way more tracks, and I started getting real clients who actually paid me well. Hey, I'm Mikhail Kush, and I've been producing music for the last 14 years. I've worked with over 120 clients across 70 different cities, from small independent artists to international brands. I've done it all, and over this time, I've learned what's important and what's not. I've given this a lot of thought, and if I had to start again, this is what I would do. Go wide, then narrow. When you start, there are so many options, dozens of DAWs, endless plugins, and gear that you could try out. It's easy to get distracted by all of these things. But of course, go wide, go experience all of them. But as soon as you find something that works, even just a little bit, narrow down on it, master it. I started out using Ableton Live, and I would make music there, but for some reason I'd always end up blaming the software for why my music sounded bad. I convinced myself that my music was stale because Ableton's interface was too dry and too boring, and obviously no one could make good music with it, right? So I thought, okay, cool, let me switch to FL Studio. It looks way more creative. So I did. I spent so much time trying to learn a whole new piece of software instead of learning the basics of music, and the same thing happened. My excuse was, FL Studio isn't for real producers. Of course my music is going to sound amateurish. Do you see the pattern? The tool is just a tool. You are the one operating it. Stop blaming the software. Go wide, experience them all, but then narrow down and actually own your tool. Sharpen your skills with it, because at the end of the day, it's all the same. You already have it, probably. When you're just starting out, you don't know what you don't know, and getting more stuff just means you're adding more to the list of unknowns. This applies to everything: techniques, plugins, instruments, and even genres and style. This kind of leans into the idea of going narrow, keeping a laser focus on smaller components of music production rather than trying to tackle the whole beast will yield much better results and allow you to progress with a solid foundation. I remember spending hours looking for new preset libraries for the synth I was using at the time, and I spent hours and hours looking for this perfect preset library because I thought that the sound had to be absolutely perfect before I could start anything or creating anything, and that was so stupid. Had I spent that time just writing melodies with the sounds I already had, I would have gone a lot further, a lot faster. Things like gear, plugins, and sample packs can be great, but they're almost never going to be as life-changing as you imagine them to be while you're trawling the internet for every last review, convincing yourself it's the only thing that stands between you and success. As I progressed in my career and skill level, I've actively cut down on the equipment, samples, and tools I use, to the point where I've got the equivalent of a Swiss Army knife instead of a tool chest. More stuff slows you down, and you have to move quickly. When starting out on a new track, it's so important to just get ideas down as quickly as possible. Let them flow like water, and don't critique before creating. Just having something down is always going to be better than nothing. Don't overthink it. If you're laying down keys, you don't have to tweak them until they're perfect. Move on to the drums, bass, melody. Get your basic structure in place as soon as possible. How different elements interact with each other is far more important than how each individual element sounds on its own. Focus on getting a basic structure down. For me, that's usually a verse, pre-chorus, and chorus. Not always in that order, but work as quickly as you can to get to a point where you can take those three parts, duplicate them, and pretty much have a full structure. Basically get the songwriting part out of the way as quickly as possible so you can focus on production. As time goes on, you do this more, you'll naturally start doing songwriting, production, and mixing all simultaneously. Limit ideas, but don't limit yourself. Keep it simple. Instead of constantly adding more layers, focus on the core of what's already there. It's so easy to think that adding more is productive, but more often than not, you're just creating a false sense of progress. If a sound doesn't fit, replace it instead of piling more on top of it. If your melody doesn't work, fix the melody. Don't just aimlessly flick through sounds. By limiting ideas, you reduce decision paralysis. One of the best ways to do this is to set a timer. Tell yourself, I've got 30 minutes to make a track, and just go for it. Practice speed over perfection. Sure enough, it's great to just experiment, try new sounds, tools, etc. But just be conscious of that. It's experimental and not productive. Try this exercise. Sit down and pick a handful of drum samples. 2 basses, 2 sounds for chords, and 2 elements for melody. This can just be a simple vocal top line. Set your timer and just make something. When time's up, save and export what you did and start again with all the same sounds. Do that again and again and again. Get your ducks in a row. I've been in situations where I finished a track for a client, and when I needed to send the stems, the project was gone. The client had already paid me and we'd gone through all of these revisions, and for some reason I lost it. From that day, I put so much emphasis on structure and keeping a robust, organized backup. If you need a new computer or your current one gets stolen, you need to know that you can get everything back. I've had clients reach out to me 2 years later asking for a change or a specific element, and because I've kept everything organized, I could do it. It's a great value add for your clients, knowing that when they work with you, their projects are safe. Treat yourself like the client and ensure that you can always rely on your backups. There's also great satisfaction that comes from listening back to older projects and tangibly seeing your improvement. Practically, this is how my organization looks. I set up folders for admin, bounces, projects, and stems. In the admin folder, I keep contracts, agreements, profile pictures, banners, or anything that relates to my work. The bounces folder is where I export all of my tracks. So if I'm meeting up with an artist, I can flick through finished ideas quickly. Projects and stem folders are pretty self-explanatory, but having them organized like this means you always know where to find everything. It saves you so much time and hassle. And as an added benefit, this all lives in my Dropbox, which makes sharing files super easy, and I always have my tracks available on my phone. Speaking of phones, how many hours have you spent watching tutorials on your phone? We all know the feeling of tutorial binging. You spend hours watching and your brain is firing on all cylinders, but then you pull up your software and you're like, how do I do that? Make a pact with yourself. Every time you watch a tutorial, implement what you've learned immediately. Work alongside the tutorial or right after. I've learned so much over the years, but it's only when I started actively practicing what I watched that I really began to improve. So make sure that every time you learn something new, you're also doing it. This way, it sticks. Look, I've done this for a long time, and I know how frustrating it can be to feel lost in your music journey. It still happens to me and probably will forever. And that's why I made this video about what you actually need to make music, so you don't waste years figuring it out the hard way. Go check it out, or just go fucking make something.